In today's video, we get into 3 terrifying ghost stories that are true. And I want to know what you think down below in the comments. Everyone loves a good ghost story, but nothing is more terrifying than when they're true. A few years ago, I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Melbourne, Australia. They went on to recall, "It was my first time living on my own. The apartment block had been built in the 1930s. I had now been there for a few months. When I came home from work one day and went into the bathroom, I saw something strange. A wooden board which had covered a hole in the ceiling that led to a small attic space above me was fractured in 2 pieces laying on the ground. I examined the pieces closer and the board was an inch thick. It would have taken Bruce Lee to break it. My first initial thought was that the landlord had sent someone to work on the attic. I was frozen stiff with fear, with the thought of someone being up there without me knowing. Someone is up there for sure, I thought to myself. I emailed pictures to the landlord asking if anyone had been there, with an undertone of annoyance, since she hadn't warned me. Her reply read, "Please call me as soon as you're able to." When I called, she began to explain that her last 2 tenants had said the same thing happened to them. She promised to replace the board, and she did. A month later, I woke up one night around 4 a.m. My body was covered in goosebumps. So much so, that was the reason I woke up. It felt like someone was rubbing his or her ice-cold hands on me. Everything was silent. But then I heard a dragging sound coming from above my bed. It sounded as if someone was dragging a sack of potatoes. At that moment, I froze, convinced someone was up there. I thought to myself, there's no way an animal could make that sound. After 5 minutes, I worked up the courage to turn the light on, armed myself with a cricket bat, and walked to the bathroom. That's when I saw the new board covering the hole was broken in 2. I felt sick. The dragging sound had now stopped. But then I began to hear something else. Whispering. The sound was clear and coming from the attic. It sounded like children's voices. And I could hear one sentence repeated over and over. "It's your turn." I switched on every light in the apartment to make things feel like normal. It was 5 a.m. and dark outside. I decided to watch TV to try and unwind. Then a fuse blew. My pet budgie Dexter, whom I kept in the kitchen, usually never made a sound at night, but he started squawking like he never did before. It was as if someone was strangling him. I grabbed my car keys and ran out, sat in my car and waited there until the sun came up. When I saw people walking their dogs, this finally comforted me enough to go back in. The front door was open, but I figured I might have forgotten to close it when I ran out. I went to the kitchen to check on Dexter, but he wasn't in his cage. I felt sick again. All my windows were closed, so I looked everywhere inside. When I walked to the bathroom, I heard splashing. Dexter was halfway drowned in the toilet. I took him out, washed him up, and dried him. At this point, I was so confused. At 8 a.m., I called the landlord and gave her a watered-down version of the night. She replied, "Oh wow, you heard the whispering too," she said. I stayed in that apartment for another 18 months. I heard the whispering on a few occasions, and twice the board covering the hole in the ceiling moved. Although I live elsewhere now, the landlord recently called. She said that her new tenants had begged to speak with me about some stuff that's been going on there. It's their problem now. Sad to say, the old tenant never contacted them, and we're left wondering what was really going on. One night when I was 10, I was woken up by my bedroom door opening, followed by someone sitting on my bed. I felt my leg grazed and the bed sink under a person's weight. It's just mom, I thought to myself, and I opened my eyes. It was not my mom. I found an eyeless boy. He had black, empty sockets, about my age, sitting at the foot of my bed. He extended his hand, and in it was a little box. I was startled but reached out. He pulled back. I reached out again and said, "Give it." And when I reopened my eyes, he was gone. But I could still see the imprint where he'd sat on my bed. Fast forward 5 years, my girlfriend came over to do homework. After she finished, She decided to take a nap while she waited for her parents. When they arrived, I tried waking her up. She opened her eyes suddenly, looking up at the corner where the wall met the ceiling. She pointed there and went back to sleep. I shook her again and she came to full consciousness, and I explained what she'd done. She looked at me with a haunted look. She said, "Up on the wall, I saw a little boy with no eyes. He was there in a Spider-Man pose, just staring at me." I freaked out and told her my story about the same kid. Fast forward another 5 years, I was with the same girlfriend, and we now had a 2-year-old. We were living in my parents' house in my old room. My daughter started waking up at the same time every night, and she'd begin to talk. After a while, I noticed she had almost the same conversation every night. I playfully asked her once whom she was talking to. She said, "It's a little boy. He's nice. He's lost and looking for his mommy." My daughter's nightly conversations continued until we got our own place later that year. Huntingdon College is just one of the many haunted colleges in America, each with its own ghost stories. This next tale comes from the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. The haunting happened in 1972, the year of the first hash bash, and Ann Arbor's youths were going crazy for drugs, sex, and rock and roll. But for an unfortunate few, things would come to a terrible and haunting end. One 15-year-old girl would find out in a terrifying way, but not from her own abuse of drugs, or even that of anyone living. While she was at a party hosted by University of Michigan students living on Ashley Street, the 15-year-old girl, who probably had no business being there in the first place, suddenly felt a strange bone-chilling cold. According to the Michigan Daily, in an attempt to warm up, she went upstairs. That's when things really terrifying would happen to her. One of the walls of the house started moving, and a black shadow approached the girl. Meanwhile, her friends called out for her, mystified as posters popped off the wall and began to form a pile on the floor. She made her way back downstairs, and when she got there, she saw a detailed vision of a man's face come to her and found herself saying these strange words. She began saying the drugs and addiction weren't her fault, and she accepted responsibility for that. But she was not that way deep inside. She began to say she wanted to apologize to everyone involved for what she had done. The others did not see the face, but they did hear the astounding message the girl delivered, as if she was possessed by another force. What made those words even stranger was that the girl didn't even do drugs, let alone have an addiction. Her words didn't seem all that strange to the students who lived in the house though. Before they moved in, the house had been inhabited by a man with a very serious addiction. The reason he no longer lived there? He had died of a heroin overdose. Could the ghost of Ashley Street still be haunting the house? I guess that remains a mystery.